Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Today, we'll be talking about tips for reviewing an article for developmental medicine and child neurology. My name is Kathy Zebracki, and I'm one of the associate editors. And along with me today is Olivia Clark, who is a psychology graduate student at Loyola University, Chicago. Thank you for joining us, Olivia.
Thank you.
All right, so today again, I want to talk about an overview of the peer review process and some tips we can give to new reviewers. So first, Olivia, I just wanted to ask you about your first experiences as being a reviewer.
Absolutely. So I think it can be pretty intimidating when you think about reviewing papers from established researchers in your field or people whose names you've seen. But it's also really exciting to kind of help guide the distribution of new research and play a role in that process, in the process of peer review. So I think it's a little bit of both.
It's great. And hopefully today will help minimize that intimidating process, or just give people some ideas of just how exciting it is and it can be. And I think personally, I always enjoy reviewing and reading new articles, and it helps me expand my own research and understanding of how to be a critical thinker. So first, I thought I would just give an overview of how we review at Developmental Medicine and Child Neurology, just to give you guys an understanding of the process. So first, after many months of hard work, an author will submit the article to Manuscript Central, where the editor, Bernard Dand, will review the article and determine whether or not he will send it to the associate editors or he will reject it right at that initial stage.
So not all papers are sent out for review with individual reviewers?
No. So journals get tons of submissions of great articles, and some of them will be rejected right off the bat just because they may not be a great fit for our particular journal. And so they will get a letter from Dr. Bernard Dand saying that perhaps another journal might be more appropriate, or sometimes they're not scientifically sound and they will require a lot of work. So we reject it at that point with additional recommendations on how the authors could potentially revise their manuscript and resubmit either back to our journal or to another journal. Great question. So once an article is submitted to, or an article is going to be moving forward in the process, the editor will send it to the associate editors. And as associate editors, we will then send to our peer reviewers. And we usually like to have at least 2 reviews at minimum for each article.
So how are those peer reviewers chosen, or how do you decide who you're going to send these articles to?
It is a process, and it does take some time. I usually try to look at the editorial board and see who might be an expert in that area, or perhaps not necessarily in that topic, but in the methodology. And then I'll also request for ad hoc reviewers. So the ad hoc reviewers are people in the community. They can be experts, again, in that particular topic, or they can be people that others have recommended that might be good reviews, that might provide a good review for this particular article.
So as a trainee, how could I become a reviewer or get involved in the peer review process?
That is great. And we love having new reviewers, and we love mentoring early trainees as well. So the first thing we would always recommend is go to speak with your main advisor. It's likely that he or she may be on the editorial board of a journal, or if there's a particular journal you may be interested in, just contact that journal. For developmental medicine, there is a link that you can submit your interest in reviewing, and so then we could contact you from there. And one thing we always recommend too is if you are a trainee, you can also ask your mentor if you can work with him or her on a possible article that they're currently reviewing. That's a great way to get started.
Great. So if I do get an opportunity to review an article, can I decline that if I don't have time or I am not familiar with the subject area? How do you decide to accept a review assignment?
So you may be asked, and it might be an area that one may have a conflict of interest. Sometimes you'll get a paper that maybe you know the authors or they're from a lab that you know pretty well, in which case I would recommend that you decline and explain that you have a conflict of interest, and if you can, provide some additional reviewer options. Other times you might be too busy. It might be grant season or might be something else, lots going on, and you really want to make sure you're timely. And if you aren't able to complete it in a timely manner, then that's perfectly okay to let the editor know. And then another reason might be that this really is not an area that you're comfortable reviewing. So the most important thing is just to respond again in a timely manner, because that's really, really helpful for the associate editors and the journal to move everything forward. And then also just to thank for the opportunity for doing that and let them know if you're interested in reviewing in the future.
Great, thanks.
So as we begin to kind of go over the steps to reviewing an article, I thought it might be helpful, Olivia, to ask you what you did for the first time to help you prepare for reviewing an article.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I've found helpful in my experiences have been kind of taking a little bit of time to get familiar with the journal, looking at the journal's website for any instructions. It can also be really helpful, and it has been helpful to me, to review author's guidelines. So are there requirements for the paper, such as page limits and sections of the manuscript? Are there major formatting considerations that I should be keeping an eye out for? Are the references in an appropriate style? And are there particular requirements that are specific to this journal that need to be followed by the authors that I should look at? And that can be really helpful. And also looking at the requirements for reviewers. So are there certain questions that need to be answered, or certain portions of the manuscript that I should really be keeping a close eye for? So right at the beginning, just getting familiar with the basic requirements and the structure of the manuscript that I'll be reviewing.
That's great. Sounds like you do a lot of work preparing before you even read the article.
Absolutely. But once I get oriented to the journal and oriented to the requirements, how would you suggest that I start reviewing the paper? What comes next?
So obviously you want to read the article, and this is a little bit different than reading an article for pleasure or perhaps for a class. You really want to read the whole article thoroughly, including things like the tables, the appendices, the footnotes, references, and disclosures. And while I'm reading an article, I'm taking notes the whole time. And if there's a part of the manuscript that is not clear to me, I note that, because most likely if it doesn't make sense to me, it might leave questions for others as well. So really your role as a reviewer is, and your role as a reviewer is to provide an overview of what you think the article's strengths are, as well as areas that can improve the clarity, the soundness, and so forth of the article.
Great. That makes a lot of sense, kind of looking at it holistically and noting areas that might be confusing. Once you start writing your actual review, what's the best way to structure it, do you think?
Again, I'd like to provide an overview initially. So this overview will help the editor kind of understand the main points of the article. So I like to have 1 or 2 sentences explaining the purpose of the article and the bottom line results. So what are the main results in this? What are the main points of the article? What are the results? You're not really rewriting the abstract. You're just really setting the stage for the rest of the review. I always do want to also thank the editor for the opportunity to review. I think that's important. And this is also, as always, a dialogue between you, the reviewer, and the editors. And then I like to start off by highlighting the things that I enjoyed most about the article, the strengths of the article. It could be something that you think it's an interesting topic. Perhaps it's a great fit for the journal. It's an interesting idea. So it's always nice to start off with those positive comments before you go into some of the other areas. And then after that, I try to break it down into sections.
Okay. So when you're breaking it down into sections, how specific do you get in terms of your feedback related to different portions of the manuscript?
I try to be as specific, constructive, and clear as possible. The goal of my comments is really to help the authors then revise their paper and to help have it to be a stronger paper. So if there's something specific I don't understand, I will clarify that it is on page 2 or line 10, whatever it may be, and saying authors may want to add X, Y, and Z to this section because it was unclear, or perhaps if there's a reference missing, I'll be very specific in those guidelines. I also try to differentiate between major and minor points. So for example, if there's something that is more stylistic or something that I might want to recommend a change, but it's minor, I will note that as well, versus something that is a major flaw that is going to be hindering the scientific soundness of the paper. And then I also provide some general comments. So for example, if there is only one limitation or maybe one clinical implication, I will note that, and that's more of a general comment. I will also note if a paper is well written or if it is difficult to follow.
Got it. That makes sense. I really liked your point about differentiating major points and minor points. I think that can be helpful when the authors are going back to revise their manuscript. Absolutely. So do you look at each section of the paper individually, or are you looking kind of more generally at the entire manuscript?
So both. After I do that overview, then I will break down, I'll have a document and I break it down into all the sections of the paper. So the abstract, the intro, methods, and so forth. And then underneath that, I will provide specific comments. So for example, under the abstract, perhaps talk about, is it clear? Does it match what the actual paper is saying? For the introduction, I think this really sets the story for the paper, for the science. So does it have a strong rationale? What is the current literature? What is this paper addressing? Like, how is the paper addressing the gaps in the literature? And so forth.
And so as you get into the methods of the paper and the statistics, how do you approach that? I know I'm not familiar with every method section or every statistical approach that I've come across. So how do you get into the method section?
It's an overview about whether or not it's methodologically sound. So you don't have to be a statistical expert to review this section. If it's something that you're not familiar with, that's completely okay, and just note that. And the editor, for developmental medicine, we always do have a statistical analysis anyways, a statistical reviewer. But you want to look to see at least if what the variables are being assessed, if those match the introduction, if they match what the goal of the article is. You want to look at the sample size to see if it has enough power. Are the procedures clear? So the method section should really help a future researcher replicate the study if needed. You can also mention things about ethical guidelines and best practices. And again, is the method section in line with what the goals and the hypotheses were noted earlier?
All right, great. So making sure that the method section is kind of aligning with larger principles and with the study as a whole. Got it.
Exactly. And it's setting up the story then for the results section. Everything should flow nicely. So then when you're talking about the results, are they going to be clear? Do they refer to the statistical analyses? Are they statistically significant or clinically significant? So all of these points I'm thinking about when I'm reading the article. And if there's any areas that seem to be notably missing, I'll write those down.
Great. So getting into the discussion section of a manuscript, discussion sections I find can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming because they bring together this new research, previous research, and it can be a lot to kind of parse through as a reviewer. What things would you suggest that I be looking for in the discussion section?
You're right. It can be very overwhelming. And truthfully, a lot of times people will just read part of the intro and then they'll read the discussion, right? Those are the take-home messages. So one of the common errors we see are authors just repeating the results in the discussion section. And that should not be the case. The discussion section is really the author's analysis of the data collected. Are they interpreting the data? Are they discussing the clinical and research implications of what they found, the limitations? And then also going back to the introduction, are the conclusions consistent with the questions that were posed in the introduction? Is the data, are the conclusions in line with the data, or do they go beyond what was actually looked at during the study? So those are some of the areas I focus on in the discussion section.
Got it. Great, thanks. And then what about all the other pieces of the manuscript? So things like tables and figures, references, disclosures. As a reviewer, how much am I paying attention to those things, and what aspects of those should I be focusing on?
We recommend definitely, you always want to review everything. You're the gatekeeper to future research. So look at those tables, look at those figures. Do they make sense? Are they repetitive? Are they needed? So if there's something that can be said in a table, can it be removed from the text or vice versa? So even disclosures, like is there potential conflict of interest between what the author is presenting and perhaps where they're getting their funding from? And also the references. You don't need to read all the references on the reference list, but just take a quick look at some of the dates. Are they recent articles? Are they really old? Are there any major articles that are missing that should have been cited that are not? So those are things that I'll be looking for and noting also in my review.
Got it. Got it. And I know you said that our reviews should be specific and they should be detailed. What about things like grammar or editing? Should I be noting every spelling error I see or need for extra commas? Are those things my responsibility as a reviewer?
No, but I notice I do that too. I catch myself correcting grammar, and that's probably me, but or just habit, I guess. But no, your job as a reviewer is not to correct the grammar and the editing. Definitely note if there are a lot of errors and make that recommendation. However, you do not have to note everything specifically. And also sometimes the writing is not in English or not the native language of the author. And that's okay. So you can note that in your review and potentially recommend a medical translator or writer to help with that in the next revision if it moves forward.
Got it. Great, thank you. So now that I've created my document, I've included all my comments about the different sections of the manuscript. What's my next step? Where do I go with that?
Done so much great work. So now you have to come up with your recommendation. So for developmental medicine, we ask for reviewers to comment if they should accept if the paper should be accepted, if there should be a minor revision, a major revision, or a rejection. For accept, this virtually never happens on the first round. No article is perfect. There's definitely changes and recommendations that one can always do to improve their paper. A minor revision is a paper that is truly, truly excellent. This again is a rare that something is near perfection. This can be a paper that may need some minor tweaking. No major statistical analyses, revisions need to be done. When you're talking about a major revision, this is something where perhaps the rationale isn't very clear. You might need to have new additional analyses. The flow might need to get worked on, but bottom line, the paper is sound, and there definitely can be some edits that can be made to make it worth, or to have it move forward to the publication process. And then you reject an article if the analyses might need so many revisions that it needs to be pretty much a brand new paper. There's insufficient data, or if the data is contradicting itself, or it can also be potentially that it does not add to the literature. It's not methodologically sound. So really you provide that to the associate editor, then the associate editor will look at all the other reviews and then consolidate those and then present that to the editor who will make the final decision.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks. Any final tips and tricks for new reviewers?
I mentioned this earlier, but timeliness really is important. If you think about how long it takes to submit a grant for a study, do the study, then write up the study, and now you're trying to get it published, it's a long process. So really try to meet those deadlines. If you're you can't make it, let the editor know as soon as possible, ask for an extension or so forth, but try to be as timely as you can. And I know we all get busy, and this definitely is something extra that we add to our plates. But Olivia, as we end here, I was wondering too, what additional tips you might have to new reviewers, or how new reviewers can start in this process.
Absolutely. I've found it really, really helpful to work with mentors that I have that are experienced reviewers and that have the time and are willing to mentor me on different reviews. I found it super helpful to discuss with my mentors kind of my reviews, pieces of the article that I feel like could be improved, and see where we align and where they feel like my my critique can be strengthened or improved. That's been really helpful. Also, just being able to see their reviews, so see the things that they catch on to in these manuscripts, has been really, really helpful. I also think that just practicing has been really great in terms of helping me to kind of develop these skills. So I've tried to do as many reviews as I can, kind of within time constraints, of course, and within kind of my field that I feel comfortable reviewing. And I think that I've gotten more comfortable with doing reviews as I've done more and more. So those are my two biggest things that I think students or trainees can absolutely do.
Well, thank you so much, Olivia. I know I've always enjoyed reviewing your reviews. And I think just in the general reviewing process, I think it's helpful for trainees, because personally, I found that it makes my own research stronger, because when I'm writing, I'm always thinking about how will a reviewer respond to this, or will they understand what I'm trying to say. So I highly encourage people to review. I also think if you have any questions about the review process, feel free to email or contact the associate editor. We all like to help and want to have this to be a great process for everybody, and for the reviewers as well as for the authors. So feel free to reach out to any of us at any time. But thank you so much.
Thank you.